is a felled seam, and it's a very strong enclosed seam, which means that the seam allowances and all the raw edges are caught up within the construction of the seam. They're enclosed within there, and it's very strong because they're all held against the actual surface of the fabric. So all of those layers are all creating structure in that point there. They're used a lot in workwear, and everyday shirts often have felled seams in the underarm seam. Now, you can fell towards the right side or the wrong side of fabric. Just for argument's sake, on this one, we're going to do the fell towards the right side of fabric, which is the way that it's often done on those underarm seams on shirts or on trousers, on the legs of trousers sometimes. So we're going to actually start this with a 15mm seam allowance, and you could do exactly the same thing with a 12mm seam allowance. It doesn't really matter. But for argument's sake, I'm just going to keep this edge on that 15mm mark and stitch a plain seam. So this will be right sides out, wrong sides together, and I'm going to back tack at each end there. Okay, so that's our seam allowance. Now on one side of that seam allowance, I'm actually going to trim off the excess above it. I'm going to trim it back to about 6mm, which is 1/4 inch. So leaving the other side whole. So you'll have one side at 15 and one at 6. And I'll get rid of that. Now what we want to do is we're going to fold all of this up here, but just to make sure that there's no little lip on the inside so that you don't end up with losing fabric in the seam, we're going to press it. And I'm using my fingers here. You would use an iron for this. I'm just doing it because I'm at the machine to save getting up and pressing. And then press the fabric on the right side of fabric. Press the seam allowance over. And then what you're going to do is fold the larger seam allowance around the shorter one, like this, into the seam. And you can use the edge of that cut seam allowance to help you get a really nice clean edge on that fold. So just fold it in like that and press it again with an iron. It is better than fingers. And the next thing to do is to stitch all of these seam allowances flat to the right side of fabric. We're going to edge stitch up, which is about 1 to 2mm from the folded edge, and stitch all the way down. I'll pop that under there. And stitch all the way down there. Now I'm using black thread. You would normally use thread that matches your fabric. This is just so that it's very visible from this distance. And there we go. So that would be your felt seam. I'll pull it out there. And on the wrong side of fabric, you've got the seam with one row of stitching, and on the right side of fabric you have these 2 rows of stitches, one of them being about 2mm from the edge of the fabric. So that's your felled seam.